Am I really supposed to believe my son stood for the first time in his life just because you danced? The millionaire's voice rang out across his sprawling estate. It wasn't curiosity but an accusation, echoing sharply through the grand halls. Standing before him was the new maid, a woman without credentials or experience. For 7 long years he had spared no expense, hiring renowned doctors and cutting-edge therapists. Yet despite all the money spent, he had never been able to buy even a single step from his boy. And now, right in the middle of his lavish living room, a miracle had unfolded, all sparked by a simple dance to soul music. A truth too plain to believe, yet too extraordinary to deny. 7-year-old Theo Prescott lived in a world entirely his own. It wasn't that he lacked the ability to speak. He was just mysteriously, stubbornly silent. He had never shouted, never laughed aloud, not even during painful therapy sessions. Even when he fell and bled, he didn't cry. He only stared, always watching, always listening, never uttering a sound. Dozens of experts had tried and failed. Charles, his father, had poured a fortune into treatments. Yet Theo remained still as stone in his chair. When Theo was 2, his mother walked away, unwilling to face the truth of her son's lifelong limitations. She left Charles alone, burying himself in business to drown the emptiness. The only constant was Elma, the housekeeper. But with age catching up, she confessed she could no longer manage. That was when she recommended someone unusual. Not a nanny, not a nurse, just a woman with plenty of life behind her. Her name's Nia Traylor, Elma said. Not polished, but she's kind-hearted. Charles didn't care about kindness. He wanted discipline, structure, order, nothing more. Still he agreed. A week later, Nia arrived with nothing but a battered suitcase of old clothes, a box of vinyl records, and a framed photo of her 2 boys. Theo didn't say a word to her that day, and she hardly spoke either. She simply met his gaze, smiled softly, and whispered, "You don't have to talk, little one. I'll do the talking for both of us." And she kept her word. Every morning and afternoon, she filled the mansion with her voice, telling stories of Georgia, of raising sons alone, and filling the rooms with the warm crackle of soul music. Charles only noticed when Theo finally stood. But long before that day, something much deeper had been stirring. What struck Nia first about Theo wasn't the chair, but his eyes. She called them old man's eyes. The kind Southerners used to describe a child carrying too much sorrow. His stare wasn't empty, just restrained, as though waiting for a reason to care again. Theo noticed everything. The way she shifted the cereal box, how she folded towels differently from Elma, and the songs she hummed while cooking. He never spoke, only tilted his head slightly whenever she passed. To Nia, his silence wasn't strange. It reminded her of her youngest son, Lennel. He was quiet like that, she said one morning as she cracked eggs. Didn't talk till 4. Just sat there with those big eyes, studying everything like he was grading the whole world. Theo blinked, listening. Nia went on, smiling. Of course, once he found his voice, he never stopped. One time he told me he dreamed our dog robbed a bank with an ice cream cone. She chuckled. Silliest thing I ever heard. From the hallway, Theo let out the faintest puff of air. Maybe it was a laugh, maybe not. Nia didn't press. She kept chatting as if he had answered. As she scrubbed, dusted, or mopped, she told him about Lennel frying bacon on an iron, about sweltering nights without air conditioning when they slept under damp towels, and about her mother's peach cobbler recipe she never quite mastered. "You know what I've learned?" she said one day, peeling potatoes. "Most people think talking is what makes you connect. But you're different." She looked right at him. "You listen. I feel it." Theo didn't turn away, only gave the slightest nod. Tears welled in Nia's eyes. That single gesture meant more than words ever could. The days flowed gently after that. Whenever she cleaned, Nia played her old records, Sam Cooke, Aretha, the staple singers. The music wasn't loud, but it filled the house with warmth. Theo sat by the window, watching quietly, his eyes following her as she danced clumsily with a rag in hand. One morning, she caught him tapping his fingers on the armrest, ever so slightly to the beat. "Hey, little man," she said softly. "You've got rhythm in you, don't you?" Theo froze, wide-eyed as if caught doing something forbidden. Nia didn't tease. She simply said, "That's a gift. A real gift." The next day, she turned the music up just a little and left the door open wider, dancing slower, as though waiting for someone to join. Theo didn't move, but he was watching. Charles, however, remained blind to all of it. The silence had become normal for him. To him, Nia was just background noise. "Is everything running smoothly?" he asked Gina. "Yes, sir." Theo seems calmer. "Good. Keep her on." He never asked how she managed it. He didn't care. But Theo cared. Every story, every off-key hum planted something inside him. Not hope, exactly, but recognition. The sense that someone saw him and wasn't afraid. And sometimes recognition is enough to spark change, especially when the right song plays at the right time. Nia Traylor had never planned on being a housekeeper. Her dream had been to teach first grade. "Kids that age still believe in magic," she'd say. "They think adults know everything." But life has its own path, and hers was altered forever in 2007. It was a rainy Sunday in Georgia. Her husband Leonard drove their old Honda Civic home from church when a truck ran a red light and smashed into the passenger side. Leonard died instantly. 3 days later, Nia woke in a hospital, battered, with a dislocated shoulder and fractured ribs, only to learn her 4-year-old son had stopped speaking. That was Lionel. Her older boy, Kendrick, survived with only emotional scars. From that moment, Nia had to rebuild from nothing. She moved in with her sister, scraping by on dishwashing, laundry work, and janitorial shifts. But through it all, she never stopped talking to her sons. Even when Lionel stayed silent, even when Kendrick grew restless, she kept on speaking, singing, and loving them. "I know what silence feels like," Nia said to Theo as she polished the stair rail. "But silence doesn't always mean the end. Not when someone still speaks to you like the conversation hasn't stopped." When Nia first arrived at the Prescott estate, she had no degree and no sparkling resume. What she carried with her were the lessons life had carved into her. That quiet children are never truly silent. They're absorbing everything. That people begin to heal when they are truly seen. And that persistence, more than anything else, can mend what seems unfixable. Her first days in Connecticut felt like stepping into a strange, foreign land. The mansion's doors opened with fingerprints, and the refrigerator actually talked. On her first night, she wandered through the sleek kitchen and muttered, "This place has more buttons than a spaceship." But she refused to let the strangeness discourage her. She quickly built a rhythm. Up at 6:30 a.m., breakfast ready by 7, vacuum the east wing before 9, and the bedroom spotless by noon. Everything had an order. Yet the person she noticed most was Theo. She knew his eggs had to be soft, his toast cut into neat triangles. That he'd wear only navy socks. That he hated harsh lights but wanted the curtains open just enough to let sunlight spill in. It wasn't spoiling him, it was paying attention. And Theo felt it. One evening, while she tidied the kitchen, a light touch brushed her elbow. She turned to see Theo in his wheelchair, holding out an Otis Redding record. She smiled and gently took it from him. "You want this tomorrow?" she asked. He gave a small nod. "All right," she whispered. "We'll play a little Otis, your pick." The next morning, she kept her word. She placed the record on the player, and Otis Redding's warm, gravelly voice filled the room. Nia, in old slippers and her apron, began to sway. She didn't look at Theo. She wanted him to feel no pressure. With her eyes closed, she spun once, then twice. When she opened them, Theo was in the doorway. Out of his chair, gripping the banister, legs trembling, his face pale, but his eyes locked on her. "Little one," she whispered. "Don't be afraid. I'm right here." He didn't fall and he didn't flee. He simply stood. Nia didn't panic. She just kept moving slowly, gently, like the floor itself carried a story meant only for them. Softly, she hummed an old lullaby from her childhood, rolled a colorful ball within his reach, and coaxed, "Come on, son. Reach for it. Feel the ground. It's steady just like your heartbeat." For once Theo's face, usually twisted with strain, eased into a fragile smile. His small hands pressed to the floor, knees bending slightly. It was the tiniest shift, but Alexander's chest tightened with awe. This step was larger than anything months of therapy had produced. Nia's focus never wavered from the boy. She followed no handbook, no charts, no costly equipment. Just simple games, drawn from a childhood where little could be bought, but imagination was endless. Theo giggled, inching forward after the rolling ball, when Alexander walked in. His voice was thick with shock. How? How did you do that? Nia raised her eyes, steady and certain. Mr. Voss, it wasn't about doing. It was about being. Theo wasn't waiting for someone to pull him forward. He needed someone to meet him where he already was. For the first time, Charles's gaze cut at her, demanding, "Tell me what happened. What did you do? Did you drag him up? Did you stage this?" Nia stayed composed. "Sir, was that safe? What if he'd fallen? I didn't lay a hand on him." "Then you must have pushed him somehow, encouraged him?" "I danced. He watched. That's it." Charles leaned closer, his voice sharp. "You expect me to believe my son stood for the first time in his life because you danced?" Nia met his stare unflinching. "I don't need you to believe me. But I do need you to listen. That boy has been surrounded by people speaking about him, as if he isn't present. Doctors, therapists, even you. Everyone looks at what he can't do, never at what he can. I didn't force him. I just showed up and treated him like a person, not a diagnosis." "And you think that's all it took?" Charles narrowed his eyes. "No. I think that's all he needed." Silence stretched between them. Charles rubbed his palms together, his head bowed. Her words struck because they were true. Nia rose to her feet. "I'm not claiming his steps as my triumph. But I won't pretend they weren't his own. I only danced." Charles slowly stood as well, his tone softening. "I've spent millions on the best experts. And you're telling me all he needed was someone to talk to him?" "No. I'm saying he needed someone to notice him, to really see him." Charles didn't answer. He poured himself a drink instead. Nia waited a moment, then turned to go. But before she reached the door, his voice stopped her, lower, gentler this time. "Why the music? Why always those records?" Nia's smile was faint but warm. "Because songs don't ask anything of you. They don't force you to move, or judge you if you don't. They simply exist. And when you're ready, your body listens all by itself." That evening, Charles sat in the living room watching the surveillance footage. Theo watching Nia dance, then the boys' unsteady, trembling but very real steps. Upstairs, Theo couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, searching for words to describe what he felt. He thought of Nia's voice, her movement, the way she never demanded, yet somehow made him believe he could. Closing his eyes, he whispered into the darkness, "I'm not afraid anymore." That night, conversation lingered deep into the hours. For the first time in years, Charles canceled his meetings, absorbed in Nia's quiet strength. Laughter began to echo through the mansion, signaling a shift, the impossible slowly reshaping into hope. Outside, the rain finally stilled, as if the sky itself recognized the change within those walls. Charles found himself revisiting his wife's old advice, to treasure the moments instead of chasing milestones. Words he had once brushed aside in sorrow now carried weight, as Nia breathed warmth back into routines that had grown cold. Theo's small triumphs hinted at a much greater change. The quiet halls of the mansion were stirring again, not from grand displays, but through the quiet strength of human connection. Nia returned to her room, her steps lighter with renewed purpose, unaware that her simple acts had begun reshaping Charles's long-standing view of the world, one shaped by isolation and privilege. His phone buzzed with unanswered calls, but for once he ignored them, choosing instead to focus on the boy who had given him his first glimpse of hope. The mansion no longer loomed like a monument to loneliness, but instead felt like a canvas waiting for new beginnings. That evening, Charles lingered as he tucked Theo into bed, whispering promises to truly be present. The boy's calm, steady breathing was living proof of that day's quiet miracle. From the hallway, Nia smiled faintly at the scene before retreating silently. The awakening had begun, laying a foundation for deeper trust and healing yet to come. By morning, Charles was downstairs earlier than usual. He found Nia stirring porridge while Theo sat at the table with his coloring book. "Morning," Charles said, his voice still rough. "Good morning, Mr. Prescott," Nia replied. He stepped closer, glancing at the child's sketch. "Is that a record player?" he asked. Theo smiled faintly. "He says he wants to learn how to use mine," Nia explained without turning. Charles nodded. Maybe we should get him his own. He paused, then added, if he's learning to stand, he ought to learn how to dance too. But before their new rhythm could take root, Nia carried a truth she had long left unspoken. On a cool Sunday morning, she knelt by the flower bed, her fingers pressed into the soil, not gardening, but reminding herself she was still alive, still grounded after loss. Theo wheeled over quietly, watching for a moment before speaking softly. Miss Nia. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned. Yes, little one? Can I ask you something? Of course. He lowered his gaze, then looked up again. After something bad happens, are you ever scared to talk again? Nia didn't reply at once. Instead, she drew a folded, time-worn paper from her apron pocket. It was a child's drawing. 2 boys, a man with a crooked smile, and her in a triangular dress with long arms. My son Lionel drew this when he was 5, she said quietly. After the accident, he stopped speaking for a whole year. But every week, he would hand me pictures like this. It was his way of telling me he was still here. Theo's fingers traced the stick figures gently. Nia crouched down to meet his eyes. I was afraid every single day, she admitted. Not because he was silent, but because I didn't know if he'd feel safe enough to come back. Do you ever feel like the words are stuck? Theo nodded. That's okay, she said with a gentle smile. They'll come when they're ready. Until then, keep living, keep moving, keep listening. Something new was beginning to take hold in the Prescott household. Theo was no longer just standing. He was taking slow steps, a little more each day. Some days were harder, but he didn't give up. He was speaking too. Short phrases, still soft but clearer, and always directed to Nia. Charles, for the first time in years, stayed home more. He cut back his endless meetings, spent evenings in the living room listening to records, asked Theo about his drawings, and even attempted to dance once. It was awkward and stiff, but Theo's laughter filled the room, bright and loud. Charles turned to Nia and said, That laugh is worth more than any deal I've ever signed. She simply nodded, passing him another record. 3 weeks later, Charles asked Nia to remain permanently, not as a housekeeper, but as Theo's companion, his support, whatever role she wished. I'll stay, she answered with a smile. But no titles. Just Nia. One evening, after Theo was tucked into bed, Charles and Nia shared coffee at the kitchen table. He finally asked the question he had long avoided. Why did you come here from Georgia? Nia studied her cup before answering. Because after Lionel died, I needed to know I could still reach someone. Charles froze. Len died. She nodded. 3 years ago. An asthma attack. The ambulance didn't make it in time. He was silent. There were no words. I don't talk about it much, she continued softly. The pain never really leaves. But when Elma called about this job, told me about a little boy who never smiled, I felt pulled here. You saved him, Charles whispered. She shook her head. No. He saved me. That night, Nia stood in Theo's doorway, watching him sleep peacefully, his chest rising and falling with steady rhythm. Thank you, little one, for letting me in, she whispered, switching off the light. Sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who change everything. Healing doesn't always come from clinics or manuals. Sometimes it's found in a song, a quiet room, a woman with tired feet and an open heart, and a little boy who was finally ready to rise again. If this story touched you, please share it. You never know who may need its message.